The Gonzaga coaching staff is back out on the recruiting trail, taking a look at a few very high-level recruits in the class of 2024. More on those two young men from Jason Jordan of Sports Illustrated right here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Don't go away.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. I'd also like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, I am joined once again today by Jason Jordan of Sports Illustrated. The Zags are out on the recruiting trail, the coaching staff out there looking at a few high-profile guys in 2024. Jason, you and I have already talked about a few guys that I know that the staff has visited recently. Zoom Diallo, who was in Spokane last weekend, got an offer from the Zags, and Jamari Phillips, who I know Coach Brian Michelson is out watching right now. But I want to talk about two other guys who we haven't talked about yet, both from prolific prep high school in California. That would be Yves Missi and Paul McNeil, both on that squad, both reportedly being visited by Gonzaga's coaching staff. Both have a lot of Power 5 offers already, two really talented kids. I want to start with McNeil. He's a big guard, bunch of offers already on the table. What can you tell me about this guy and how he might fit at Gonzaga?
Oh, I love Paul's game. Did a story on him back in July. Watched him on the Adidas circuit. He played with Garner Road. He had a big summer. Well, he was coming off a big year where, in which he won Gatorade Player of the Year in the state of North Carolina. That's only happened twice. That he's the second time that's ever happened in the history of the Gatorade Awards that has happened where a sophomore has won. And, he had a dominant sophomore season. So, and I'm here in North Carolina. I can tell you he deserved to win that award based off the and then, North Carolina's a hotbed for recruiting, so that should say a lot.
Yeah.
But I, 6'5", probably 6'6", 6'5", but very shifty. It's tough to be shifty at that size.
Yeah.
Is why I even bring it up. But he is super shifty and gets to his spot super easy. I've never seen anybody that can stay in front of him. Specifically, I remember at the Adidas All-American camp, nobody could really stay in front of him. And so when you're shifty like that at that size and that length, I think his wingspan is like 6'9" or something like that, which is crazy, right? It's off the charts. Super athletic. And then he knocks down shots from the perimeter efficiently. So, on the most basic level, if you're knocking down shots efficiently from the three-point NBA three-point line extended, but you're super shifty and long, it's going to be a hard night, for even the best defenders, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole adage of great D beats great O 7 days out of the week, and so he just really fits that mold. And then on the defensive end, he really competes, really tries, and at his size and length and his agility, he's able to be a lockdown defender on the defensive end of the floor. A guy I'm obviously very high on. Yeah. And definitely one of the best players on the Adidas. I think it was 19, 6, and 3 on the Adidas, sir. I mean,
jeez.
So definitely one of the best players. And he was one of the best players at the Adidas All-American camp. So a guy who I think his stock will only rise at Prolific, because Prolific Prep is a national powerhouse. And I think his stock is going to rise even more there at Prolific. But like you said, he's not hurting for offers. Yeah. But I think he'll I think he'll ascend in the class after this season.
Does he strike you as a guy who's maybe not going to have quite his pick of any school out there, but it seems like at this point with the offers he already has, with the fact that he's going to be at Prolific, like, is this a guy who borderline gets to spin a wheel and pick whatever school he wants to go to? Or do you think that he kind of fits specific programs better than others?
No, he'll get his pick. I think because he's gonna wait.
Yeah.
He's gonna wait. Like, he's not trying to rush. And I think he wants to get all the offers that he can. I don't know that he's zeroed in on one offer.
Right.
He's a North Carolina kid, so he's got North Carolina's already on him.
Yeah.
I think he's on the Duke radar a little bit.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I think he wants all those offers though, and I know Kentucky's on him too. But he wants his pick of the litter, and so I think he's going to hold out to get it.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean he's going to those schools, but I know he's going to take his time and do his due diligence. I know he comes from that type of family, so they're going to certainly do their due diligence. Great kid too, like great kid off the court. One of the best to deal with. Very, very, very mature, and he's actually his age.
Yeah.
Which I better say that part because that's not always true.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
All right, I want to move on to the other guy from the same high school, Yves Missi. He has some incredible offers already on the table as well. Baylor, Kansas, Ohio State, Michigan, among the many schools that have already made an offer here. You'd be hard-pressed to find a program that's developed bigs better than Gonzaga over the last 5 to 10-ish years. So certainly hard to imagine they're not going to be a significant player here if they are interested. What can you tell me about this kid and his game?
Yeah, well, Kentucky's involved with him too. He's, had a great summer with PSA Cardinals, 6'11" rim runner, super athlete, and just competes. Every play on both ends of the court. I mean, he's a joy to watch. A coach's dream, right? Like, he's a guy who's gonna lunch pail guy, bringing it to every time. And so a guy, high energy guy, but super skilled. Like, he's got great timing on his shot blocking. He's a really capable rebounder. I think he was over like 7.5, like around 7 for the summer. But he thrives on the offensive end is his ability to knock down like mid-range jump shots and to finish with both hands. He's got a really capable jump shot, soft hands, great physical prowess down there. So he's able to overpower. I mean, he's 6'11", and he's strong, right? But think about it like this: he's 6'11", strong, and he plays with like a mean motor, So that's why he's able to be productive. And so, he's a guy who, I mean, he's just starting to tap into his potential too, which is kind of scary. So that's why people rate him so high, because they project him to, get there, in the near future. But he's the guy who can still develop a lot. And to your point, I think that will stand out. A program who is able to develop his skill set, particular skill set, and that can show him like tangible evidence of him being able to do that. So, but definitely a guy who's had a big summer and a big spring.
Yeah, it's hard for me to not imagine Gonzaga's sales pitch is going to heavily involve looking at players like, take your pick. Drew Timme is the most notable recent example of a guy who he came to Gonzaga really good, but the amount of improvement he has had over the last few years is just tremendous. And a kid who already has some of those skills, already has that motor, that desire to get better. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine there are more than a handful of programs that are as good or better than Gonzaga at developing a kid like this.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. I mean, the footwork alone, they can just do a whole Zoom call on how they develop footwork,
absolutely.
With video and stuff like that.
Jason, thank you so much for coming on, talking about these two kids. Very exciting. I know Gonzaga fans love to learn about the new guys that the staff is interested in. So this is fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely, man. Look forward to the next time.
All right. Thank you again to Jason for joining me today. Second segment coming up is a preview of this year's Kraziness in the Kennel and the updated Gonzaga roster. But before we get there, I want to tell you all about BetOnline. College basketball may be deep into the offseason, but college football and the NFL are just getting started, and the WNBA and MLB still have action left as well. BetOnline.net is your #1 source for all of your betting needs and sports information. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. They even have lines for coaching changes across every major sport, so even in the offseason, you can get your fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags. And I want to thank you all for making Locked On Zags your first listen of the day. I also want to thank all of you who have watched the show on YouTube, and of course, those of you who have then subscribed to the YouTube channel, trying to get to 1,000 before the start of the college basketball season, which is just under 2 months away. If you are a listener to the show and you haven't done so yet, go to youtube.com, search Locked On Zags, find the channel, and hit that big orange subscribe button. It is much appreciated. All right, we are talking craziness in the kennel today. It is officially set for October 8th, 2022. That is, as I'm recording this, just 3 weeks away. College basketball is so close to being back. Craziness always marks the official start, at least in my head, of the college basketball season. It is set for 4 p.m. again on October 8th in the kennel. Of course, there are going to be tickets available, so this is a free event. For those of you listening in Spokane, I know many of you are not in Spokane, probably don't have the ability to go to this event. Unfortunately, it will be televised in some capacity. I haven't gotten information on that yet, but it is a free event, but it is a ticketed event. So you cannot just show up the day of and hope to get in. You have to acquire a ticket. They announced the tickets will be available on the 5th, and they will be available on Gonzaga's website. That is the extent of what I can provide information-wise at this point on that. So if you're in the Spokane area or planning to travel there, keep your eyes peeled for an announcement a couple days ahead of time. I know it's frustrating for anybody trying to travel, but again, the event will be televised or at least streamed, will be available to watch in some capacity. So hopefully those who want to see it are able to find a way to see it. For anybody who's new to Gonzaga or hasn't really participated or seen a Craziness in the Kennel before, it is the official first practice of the season. A lot of programs kind of do some kind of celebratory event in that regard. In this case, for the Zags, they do a 3-point shootout, they do a dunk contest, and then they do a scrimmage between players on the roster. They have a blue team and a white team, kind of mix up the perceived starting lineups and give these guys a chance to really kind of go at each other in a controlled and not particularly competitive scrimmage environment. They're trying to win, obviously, but you're not going to see guys out there doing anything to potentially risk getting hurt. It's more of a kind of showmanship for the fans. Mark Few's not really out there doing a lot of coaching or critiquing or stopping play to kind of address things that I'm sure all happen in practice, but we're not seeing that in this. It's just kind of a fun event for the fans to get their first chance to look at some of these guys. And in this case, there are 4 players on the roster that Gonzaga fans will get to see in a Gonzaga uniform for the first time. That is, of course, the 2 transfers, Malachi Smith, the guard from Chattanooga, Efton Reed, the big man transfer from LSU, as well as incoming freshman Braden Huff, and the newest Zag, a Zag that many people are just hearing about for the first time, walk-on guard Kellen Mitchell. So obviously the Zags lost 2 walk-ons from last year's roster, Matthew Lang, who is now at the University of Arizona alongside Rem Bakamus and, of course, Tommy Lloyd, and then Will Graves, who is back in Oregon. He is at Southern Oregon University for his final year of eligibility. So the Zags had some room to add a walk-on. They have done so. Kellen Mitchell is the newest player on the roster. He's going to wear number 4. It's going to look a little bit like Kevin Pangos out there. He's from Fairmont Prep High School in Muskegon, Michigan. He actually joined the roster in June, or at least announced in June via his Twitter account that he was planning to come to Gonzaga and that he was going to be on the basketball team. The roster coming out was the first time that we had officially seen his name on the roster. So it is confirmed. He has made the team. He is a walk-on for the team. He's a big guard. He put up good numbers in high school. We don't know a whole lot else other than that. Obviously, Gonzaga has had a pretty storied history with walk-ons, although it's been a while since they've had a walk-on who really stepped into a significant role. I think the closest we've seen lately has been Jeremy Jones, and that was a bit of a unique situation in the sense that Jeremy was already a college athlete by the time he came to Gonzaga as a walk-on. He was a transfer, but I believe he was a walk-on. I believe he wasn't on scholarship. I'm actually not 100% sure how that situation came to be. Mike Hart is, of course, the most notable example in the last decade, barely, of being a walk-on who really kind of stepped into his own. He was a starter on the number 1 team in the country after being a guy who spent the first Craziness in the Kennel that Mike Hart was a student at Gonzaga. He was sitting in the crowd. He watched the first Craziness in the Kennel in, I guess it would have been 2008 or 2009. And then shortly after that, he tried out for the team, made the team. And then a few years later, boom, he's starting. So an incredible story, one you're probably not going to see very much more at Gonzaga just because the the reach of the program now, and obviously things like the transfer portal, instant eligibility, stuff like that makes it a little bit more challenging for walk-ons to really rise to that level. But again, Tommy Kusi was a walk-on at St. Mary's. St. Mary's and Gonzaga are not recruiting at the same level these days, but that's still an incredible accomplishment for a player to do that. So it's not out of the question. I don't know nearly enough about Kellen Mitchell to give you any kind of guess as to whether he's going to be the first walk-on off the bench. Like, there's always a couple guys that you're cheering for. I remember we want Rem Chance. I remember Brian Baskar was a guy who got a lot of those chants. I know Lang got a lot of those chants. Will Graves got a lot of those chants. So there's guys on this team. Joe Few obviously is going to get them because he's the coach's kid. There's a little bit of an advantage that he has there. Colby Brooks and Abe Eagle are now entering their third seasons at Gonzaga. They have not played a minute of college basketball up to this point. I suspect that will change with Will and Matthew Lang out the door. I'm guessing that more opportunities for those guys to show up. Again, they're going to still play in garbage time, probably like last minute of the game garbage time, because I think that some of the other guys, potentially Braden Huff, potentially Ben Gregg, Caden Perry, are going to play more of the actual garbage time minutes, like the last 5 or 6 minutes in the half. But I think that we'll still see some of these walk-ons get some opportunities. Potentially that's Kellen Mitchell. Potentially it's more of Abe Eagle and Colby Brooks. I'm sure we'll see some Joe Few in there as well, but always nice to see another new player on the Gonzaga roster. And then the last thing I really wanted to touch on here in this segment was the only jersey change that we saw. Everybody else is keeping their same number. Malachi Smith picked up number 13, which is what he wore at Chattanooga. Efton Reed picked up number 15, which is what he wore at LSU. Braden Huff picked up number 34, which is what he wore in high school. I already mentioned Kellen Mitchell's wearing number 4, but Hunter Salas is changing his jersey number. He wore number 10 last year as a true freshman in the program. This year, he is switching back to number 5. 5 is what he wore in high school. 5 is what he wanted to wear when he came to Gonzaga. Reportedly, he asked if he could have number 5. They said, hey, there's somebody on the team who already has it. They asked that player, which it was Martinez Arlauskas, for any detectives out there who want to look at last year's roster. Martinez wanted to keep the number. He was the veteran guy. Hunter immediately was okay with that, said, yep, absolutely. I'm a freshman. I'll take my number. I'm going to be number 10. And so he was number 10 last year, but now, of course, Martinez has departed the program and Hunter has taken back his number 5. Excited for him. I don't think jersey numbers are they're not important in the sense that it's not a lot of analysis regarding them, but it's important to the players. And I think it's nice for us to get used to seeing players in certain uniforms. Like, as I was saying, some of these numbers I could very quickly recall players who wore those numbers. I said Malachi Smith wore 13. I thought of Kelly Olynyk. I said Efton Reed wore 15, and I thought of Brandon Clark. I saw Braden Huff wearing 34. That's, of course, Chet Holmgren's number from last year. So it always kind of invokes a memory or a reminder about certain players who have worn those uniforms. So I do think it's cool. And I think it's nice that Hunter gets to wear the number that he wants to wear, because he's going to be a really big part of the team next year. And if he's more comfortable wearing number 5 or feels better in it, all the more power to him and to the Zags for letting him switch that jersey number heading into his second season. All right, we're going to come back in the third and final segment of today's show. Speaking of players who wore number 5 in a Gonzaga uniform, we're going to talk about Gary Bell. Gary Bell has a new job as an assistant coach at Northern Arizona University. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Gonzaga's prolific coaching tree right after this. All right, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags. Still appreciate you all making this your first listen of the day. Want to talk here about former Gonzaga guard Gary Bell. Gary Bell was recently hired at Northern Arizona University as an assistant coach. For those of you who did not know, Gary Bell has spent the last 3 years on Gonzaga's bench. He was a graduate assistant for 2 years, got his master's degree, spent last year in a role as coordinator of basketball administration. I don't know exactly what his role was, but I can tell you right now that coaching staffs have a finite number of actual coaches they can have on the roster. Per NCAA rules, per compliance officers, you can only have a certain number of coaches, and other people who are on staff are forbidden from doing coaching activities. That does not mean that they do not do coaching activities, perhaps in ways that they can get away with. But I remember when I worked at Seattle U, when I worked at the University of Portland, like, if you were a graduate assistant and you were like, I remember one of my friends was a soccer graduate assistant with her soccer program where she had recently graduated, and kicking the ball to the girls during warmups right before they would go out, they would run around a circle, get the ball kicked to them, try to score a goal just in warmups. You can't do that. Even as a GA, if you're not a coach, you weren't allowed to do that. I don't know how much the rules have changed. It's possible that they have, but they're pretty stringent about that stuff. So Gary was not a coach last year. I'm sure that he was offering his insight and his analysis, a very good basketball mind, obviously an extraordinarily talented basketball player, but there were limits to what he was capable of doing. So it's fantastic to see him go from that to immediately being an assistant coach. He got bumped straight into an actual coaching role. Of course, there's a big difference between being at Gonzaga and being at Northern Arizona, but this is still an awesome accomplishment for Gary. Clearly, this is the direction he wants to go in his professional career. He has taken a monumental leap forward in that regard. Being an assistant coach at a Division I basketball program, that is not an easy thing to do. So big hats off to Gary for getting there. He was recommended to the Northern Arizona staff by both Mark Few and Tommy Lloyd. Pretty darn good to be able to get recommendations from two coaches who had number one seeded teams in the NCAA tournament last year. Also, Tommy's son, Liam Lloyd, is a guard at Northern Arizona University. I think Tommy would have given Gary a tremendous recommendation regardless. And I think that it would have carried a lot of weight regardless. But if you're the head coach at Northern Arizona, and not only is this very, very talented, elite, high-level coach saying, yes, you should hire that guy, but he's saying it knowing that his kid is going to be coached by him. Gary is going to be working specifically with the guards and with the offense. Liam is a guard. Like, he's going to work directly with Tommy Lloyd's kids. So for Tommy to go out there and say, yes, this is a guy you should hire, really shows the faith that he has, and presumably that Mark Few, who employed Gary for a year after he was a GA for 2 years, they wouldn't have done that if they didn't think he was going to help their basketball team be better. So for those two programs to both have these encouraging words to say about Gary Bell is a tremendous sign of the respect they have for him and really the path that he's on to be a successful coach in this industry. He also joins a fraternity of former Gonzaga players who are coaching at the Division I level. I apologize in advance if I am missing anyone from this list. It is a really difficult thing to look up, but I tried my best to find as many D coaches at the Division I level. There are plenty of other former Gonzaga basketball players who are coaching in some capacity, whether it's D3, NAIA, high school, whatever it may be. But the ones that are coaching at the D1 level that I could find are, of course, the two on Gonzaga's staff, Coach Brian Michelson, the associate head coach, Coach Stephen Gentry, who's one of the assistant coaches, of course, Gary Bell, who we just spoke about, and then Kyle Bankhead, a former guest of the Locked On Zags podcast. He was recently hired at the University of San Francisco. Prior to that, he had been at Abilene Christian. He had been a head coach at the high school level previously, and he had also spent many years as an assistant coach at the University of San Diego. So you have those four guys, Gary, Gentry, B-Mike, and Kyle Bankhead. You also have Rem, who's working at Arizona. He's not in a coaching role yet. That is very clearly the direction that he is going, and he will likely be in that field in some capacity very soon. Again, he's not a coach officially right now, but he's still working with the players, still has a significant role on the sideline with the team, just not the official coach title. But that's a really great group of coaches right there, of former players right there. Many of them, Rem and Gary being the exception. The other three all kind of played early in Mark Few's tenure. Gary was kind of right in the middle of Few's tenure. Of course, Rem was a little bit later than Gary. They overlapped, I believe, for 2 years. And then Rem, of course, was there a little bit later. But when you have a program that has had as much success as Gonzaga has had, it's not surprising to see this kind of tree develop. We've talked about the former Gonzaga coaches and the success that they have had. Obviously, Tommy Lloyd is one. Leon Rice is one of the most, if not the most successful head coach in Boise State basketball history. You have Dan Monson, who went to Minnesota, who then, of course, turned around and went to Long Beach State. Long Beach State won the the Big West last year. It's a really tremendous group of former coaches, former Gonzaga assistant coaches who are having a lot of success as head coaches, but you also have this fraternity of former Gonzaga players who are now cutting their teeth as assistant coaches. For Few to have kind of been there through all of this, to see all of these, former assistants become head coaches, former players become assistant coaches. We're not quite to the point of former players becoming head coaches just yet, but we're getting very, very close to that. Kyle could be a head coach very soon. I think Brian Michelson is probably in line next for the Gonzaga coaching job. That was obviously Tommy's job for a very, very long time. It's still possible depending on the timeline for Mark Few, that Tommy could come back and take that job. I don't know how likely that is. It's impossible to know because Mark Few could coach for 2 or 3 more years or like 12 or 15. It's really hard to gauge how much longer Few is going to do this. I don't think a lot of people thought Jay Wright was going to call it when he did. Of course, you have guys like Jim Boeheim and Tom Izzo who seem like they're going to coach forever. Where Few falls in that kind of group is hard to say. I don't think he's going to be coaching anywhere else. He's going to be at Gonzaga until the day he decides he doesn't want to coach anymore. Whether that is Brian Michelson replacing him, whether that's Tommy Lloyd coming back and replacing him, whether they go an entirely different direction, of course, remains to be seen. But seeing how many of Mark Few's former players have gotten into the coaching profession and have had success getting into the coaching profession is a really strong testament to the kind of player that they recruit and then the kind of development that they get under Coach Few, under the rest of the coaching staff while they're in Spokane. All right, that is going to do it for me today. Don't forget to check out my written content at scorezagscore.com. We got one more episode coming out later this week right here on the Locked On Zags podcast, which is available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube as well. Finally, thank you again to those of you who have made Locked On Zags your first listen of the day. Locked On WCC doesn't exist yet, but you can get more informed on the West Coast happenings by making Locked On Pac-12 your second listen of the day. Host Spencer McLaughlin and the local experts of Locked On take you across the Pac-12 in 30 minutes, 5 times per week. All right, thank you all for listening, and go Zags.